Welcome to our continuing series of virtual voices, focusing on the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals. Our speaker today is Mr. Matt Ervin, who is an investor and a serial entrepreneur. He earned his BA and MS from Harvard University in physics and in applied sciences. He transitions into the investment industry as an analyst at AllianceBernstein and then co-manager of the Barron Growth Fund and the Barron Opportunity Fund. Matt then founded Plum Voice and grew it into a leading independent platform for AI-powered speech dialogs. The business was acquired in 2023. Then Matt also founded MedicaSafe, a pioneer in the field of remote medication therapy management for patients undergoing high-risk pharmaceutical treatments. Over to you, Matt.
All right. Well, thank you for inviting me to join. I think as we discussed, maybe I could share a PowerPoint as a way of, guiding my talk. So MedicaSafe is a corporation that was founded a few years ago around the notion that there's certain medications and medication therapy processes that are problematic and could be improved, potentially improved, we think improved, by pairing medication with technology, and the technology would be around guiding and monitoring the patient, monitoring, and trying to keep the patient on track, trying to make sure the medication therapy is safe, hence the name MedicaSafe, as opposed to problematic. And the things that come top of mind when you think about problematic medication therapies are medication therapies related to pain management with opioids. And a lot of problems in the U.S. in particular with people becoming addicted to their opioid medications for pain management. But you can also think about other therapies. There are various mental health therapies where the patients don't really follow through. Patients that are suffering from bipolar disorder or schizophrenia, even depression. And then there are treatments. There are certain types of cancer treatments where the medications are necessary, but and helpful if taken in the right way, but patients have a tendency to take too many or too few. So there's a variety of medication therapies where you really want the patient to do the right thing, not the wrong thing. And our high-level goal was to try to create technology that would kind of fit into the real world and enable guidance and useful tracking. And I'll get into what we mean by useful tracking. Now, whenever you're trying to do anything, that's somewhat big picture, like what I just described, it's helpful to start with something that's very narrowly focused. So many of you know Amazon. Amazon is now a behemoth, but Amazon didn't start as a behemoth. They started focusing on just one thing, which is the sale of books, just books. Once they perfected their technology around enabling people to access a huge variety of books, then they were able to expand it into other things. So we had to pick a focus too. And we decided that the area that was most problematic, that we could make the most impact in, was the patient population that is already suffering from addiction to opioids. They have to go through a treatment process, and there aren't too many treatment options, honestly. And we felt that the best treatment option, which involved a drug called buprenorphine, was problematic because, again, patients tend to do the wrong thing with their medication. They tended to sometimes overuse it, sometimes share it with their friends, sometimes sell it, sometimes underuse it, sometimes use it in conjunction with some other medication that was going to be problematic. So we decided to focus on helping patients going through addiction therapy And I guess the other thing that to keep in mind is it's not just helping the patient, but it's helping all the other stakeholders around the patient. So the patient has a family, the patient has a doctor, a care team. In the case of opioid addicts, the patient also has often interaction with the criminal justice system. You know, unfortunately, a lot of opioid addicts have run-ins with the law. They often end up in the emergency department. They have lots of other comorbidities. So, you know, we realize that adding technology in could help these other stakeholders. And by helping these other stakeholders, that in turn helps, you know, the goal. It helps achieve the goal. So that's a very high level overview. And then the deck is going to walk through some more detail of how specifically we've approached it. So let's see if I can get, so, you know, if you step back and think, you know, why are things not working, you know, ideally right now? Well, standard drug delivery for whether it's buprenorphine or various other medications is a pill bottle, or maybe, you know, many of you have seen like the little plastic unit dose packing that contains medication. So there's no tracking technology with those. There's no reports that come with that packaging. There's no deterrence of unauthorized access. And you know, if you merely created a better pill bottle, which on the surface is one aspect of what we have done, that wouldn't really that wouldn't completely solve the problem either. So we'll kind of get into that in a couple more slides. You can't just improve the pill bottle. You have to kind of think a little more holistically about the problem. Another aspect of the problem is that there are lab tests that are often conducted on a patient, whether they're an addict or a cancer patient. And those lab tests, you know, are meant to give useful information for the doctor, but they can be a little confusing if the doctor doesn't know what exactly the patient took. So, you know, if someone had a poor result on the lab test, is that because the medication they took was the wrong medication? Have they been prescribed the wrong thing? Or is it that they weren't taking the medication properly? And the doctor really has no way of knowing, right? And so these sort of dynamics have come to the forefront in certain situations where, you know, doctors, clinicians, and the payers in the United States, the payers being the insurance companies and the state Medicare and Medicaid plans, you know, are concerned about these issues, especially in conjunction with things like opioid addiction, opioid misuse, et cetera. So let's dive down in just a little bit more. So the interesting thing about opioid addiction is there's kind of one drug that is the workhorse drug for treating these patients. Its chemical name is buprenorphine naloxone. It often goes by the brand name Suboxone. It was developed by actually a British company that was funded by the United States National Institute of Health. And it's really a very logical treatment drug, because what it basically does is it helps satisfy the patient's cravings. It itself is a partial opioid agonist, they call it. It's a partial opioid, you might think. And it's widely used. Unfortunately, in the US, we have 10 million people that misuse opioids. And so buprenorphine naloxone gets prescribed quite often to help treat these patients. There are literally more than 12 million prescriptions a year written for buprenorphine naloxone. It's important to treat these patients because they're expensive if untreated. There's data that in the US, what they call an uncontrolled patient, meaning like maybe they've tried treatment, but they're not yet really in control in treatment, they cost $60,000 a year. And that adds up to, you know, $92 billion in the US alone. The numbers would be different in other countries, but, you know, these patients tend to be expensive in every country if they're not controlled. And controlled really means not cured, because it can be hard to completely cure a patient like this, but you want to get them into a rhythm where they're in treatment, they're trying to do the right thing, they are doing the right thing, a high percentage of the time. So this slide maybe is a little too in the weeds for this audience, but if you're a doctor, there's a technical term that you're aware of, which is called risk evaluation and management, REMS. You need a risk evaluation and management system. That's what REMS stands for, to treat patients like this. You need a REMS system for other high-risk drugs. This is something that's required by the FDA for high-risk drugs, and buprenorphine is considered a high-risk drug mainly because of the population that it's treating. But it can be hard to implement a REMS system, mainly because the tools today are primarily lab tests, and lab tests don't give you enough information. You can test whether the person has buprenorphine in their signs that they've taken buprenorphine. You can test whether they've ingested other opioids, illicit opioids. But your test results can be very ambiguous, and it's easy for the patient to explain away any result. Like they could say, "Oh, doctor, you're right. I took, I did end up taking, heroin because you didn't prescribe enough buprenorphine." Is that true? Is that not true? It's very difficult for prescribers to know today, and we wanted to address this need in the marketplace. And so the solution we've come up with, this picture depicts part of the solution. This isn't the entire solution, but what it really is the little white pills are the buprenorphine naloxone tablets, and they're pre-filled in a cartridge. And the cartridge can't be opened manually. It needs this separate device, which is a little bigger than a smartphone. And the device has a magnetic interaction with the cartridge to unlock and dispense a dose. And it tracks when it does that. And it limits the number of times per day it'll do that, because there's no medical need for the patient to have more than 32 milligrams per day of buprenorphine naloxone. If they want more than that, they're probably diverting it. And of course, it's going to you can draw inferences if the patient cracks open the cartridge, which is certainly possible, because there'll be no data of them dispensing from the cartridge, right? So you can pretty effectively keep the patient from lying. You can get information about really what their dispensation pattern is, and then we'll get to this in a few slides. But you can then pair that with the lab test results and draw inferences about that, and that's where AI and SaaS come into play here. So we're creating data from the physical technology, and we're creating data from the lab tests, and we use that data to draw inferences and really help the care team and the and whoever else is involved, the family, sometimes the criminal justice system, etc. Now, all of this data has a tendency to create something called the Hawthorne effect. Now, the Hawthorne effect is this long-known phenomenon whereby if a patient is carefully monitored, they tend to do the right thing. It's been known for a century, it's kind of it's a widely observed phenomenon. It's most commonly referred to in the context of clinical trials, because in a clinical trial, like an FDA monitored clinical trial, the patient's being carefully watched, and more so than they would in a normal treatment scenario. And so what has happened over the decades is often a clinical trial would produce a good result with the medication, and the FDA would approve the medication, and then in the real world, the medication wouldn't work as well as everyone expected. And that's because during the clinical trial, the patient was being carefully watched, and they followed the rules more accurately, took the medication, and then in the real world, the patients don't do that as much. So we wanted to kind of leverage that dynamic and sort of throw it on its head, where use the Hawthorne effect in the real world, monitor these patients more carefully in the real world to try to motivate them to do the right thing. And so we can't force them to do the right thing, but we can track them carefully and track them in a manner where they can't easily lie. And patients, even in just standard clinical trials, are notorious for not telling the truth about, whether they really took the medication at the right time or not. I mean, there have been many, many studies where there's sort of a backdoor way of telling whether they did the right thing or not, and they're very willing to tell the doctor that they did when in reality they didn't. So again, we wanted to create this system where it wasn't onerous. We don't want this to be hard for the patient. We don't want this to be, in fact, it's quite easy. They simply slide in the cartridge, press the little button on a screen and dispenses the medication. We made it super easy. We just didn't want to create a scenario where there was some other way for them to, to get at the medication in an authorized manner. So the results from the studies we've done, and these are not big, huge studies because we are not a big pharmaceutical company. We had to do this in very small budgets. The results were, lo and behold, the patients were much more compliant than usual with their, with their medication, with their buprenorphine medication. And that's a huge thing. If this data is accurate, and I say it that way because, to really know whether your data is right, you generally need a really carefully designed, big clinical study. And this was a smaller study. We certainly made an attempt to make it as objective as possible because we wanted to, get the right answers for ourselves. The results are spectacular, right? I mean, to go from 72% normal compliance to 95% normal compliance is a huge difference. And it would imply that we'd be saving tons of lives and tons of money. So hopefully this data bears out, as we scale up, because it would be hugely impactful. The other thing we're doing, though, beyond the data is it's helping the doctor figure out the scenario with the patient. This is where, again, we're using the data from the device, the data from the lab tests, and we're able to carefully map them into scenarios where they're on track or where they seem like they're actually diverting the medication, which is very, very common for this particular drug. You wouldn't imagine diversion being common for a cancer drug or other treatment scenarios, but for buprenorphine naloxone, patients often sell the drug to their, to others. There's stories of, the patients get the prescription from the doctor, they go to the pharmacy, they get the drug, they walk out of the pharmacy into the parking lot, and they sell the drug right in the parking lot. I mean, it's not uncommon. So it's an unusual drug that has, this phenomenon you wouldn't see with other medication therapies. And we can help doctors figure out who's really trying to do the right thing and who isn't. That really means something to the insurance companies too. They don't want to be paying a lot of money to a doctor, to a pharmaceutical company, to a pharmacy, et cetera, for a patient that's not even really trying to do the right thing. And that happens today quite a lot. This is the slide. The next two slides are almost the slides I could have started with, because, sometimes to understand an issue, you want to really understand where there are real unmet needs. Where can you leverage technology to do something that it just isn't being done well today? And one of them is trying to help criminal justice systems and EDs. ED stands for emergency departments. ER stands for emergency room. EDs, ERs. They need a way to get these patients into treatment. OUD stands for opioid use disorder treatment. Sorry for all the acronyms. But what's happening is a lot of opioid addicts in America are getting arrested. And it's obvious that they are an opioid addict. But the criminal justice system doesn't have a way to get them into treatment. They can say, and the judges often do say, you must go to treatment to these patients. But that's different from having a quick number to call and say, hey, I've got this patient right here. Let's get them into treatment right now. And the reason why it's difficult for them to do that is because they need these patients to be tracked and monitored. It is not politically acceptable for them to just hand the patient buprenorphine and hope that they do the right thing, hope that they take it properly. It's just not something that a jail is going to do. It's not something many emergency departments are going to do either. They need to know that they're handing the patient off to a system that's going to carefully track and monitor the patient, try to get them to the right finish line, which is having them being controlled and in treatment. And so our technology, using technology in this equation, allows that to happen, because what we can do, and once we're FDA approved, this is what we'll do, is we can provide not only the system, the drug, the technology, but we can also provide the prescriber, the doctor. And that those doctors will be accessible via telehealth. And so they can literally call us, call our doctor network and say, hey, I've got a patient here that needs to be reviewed. And there's a standard intake process, and that needs to be initiated on treatment. And then they can be prescribed our system, and a process can unfold, which will hopefully lead to the patient ending up, in a stable state. And on this slide on the right, you can see the results of a clinical trial. And this is a very carefully structured clinical trial funded by the National Institute on Drug Abuse, conducted by the Harvard of research in this space, which is called Friends Research Institute. And the results so far, this is a multi-year trial, are that 86% of the patients that have initiated, have come through the trial and been put in our treatment arm, have ended up being controlled in treatment, versus a typical number of 46%. The other arm is more like, it's 46% so far. Now, this has financial benefits as well. Uncontrolled patients cost $60,000 a year. I mentioned that before. Controlled patients, they're not cured, but they're in treatment and they're controlled, are more like $30,000 a year. It's a huge difference. Huge difference. And so, we're able then to charge a price for this service that's a fraction of that, and that enables the insurance companies to save money and us to make money. So it's a win-win all around. So this is an opportunity. I think they call these scenarios kind of, gosh, I'm blanking, but like double win scenarios where, we're doing something that's good for the world. We're almost doing a nonprofit kind of activity here, trying to treat patients that are addicted to opioids, and yet we're able to do so in a profitable manner, once we get FDA approved and up and running. I guess, for an audience like this, it might be more intuitive that this product also helps families. The patients in this scenario, opioid addicts in particular, they can be very difficult, and they may or may not really have their own interests in mind. They sometimes do not, but they're families. They still have families. Families want the right thing. And this kind of approach is an approach that helps the families monitor and coach their loved ones. And they really otherwise don't have an easy way to do that. People don't always live together. Even if they do live together, it can be hard to know day to day what your loved one is doing. And so data ends up being really interesting to families. And so, I'm trying to illustrate some specific unmet needs that, again, bringing the technology in place can address. So let me go on. I guess this is almost my last slide. It's important to understand that this product wasn't created by me. It was created really by a collaboration among a set of prescribers that have been treating these patients, and there are quite a number of prescribers that are out there that struggle with how to best monitor and treat these patients, and so they've really been, very, very involved in helping to define and figure out what technology can really do in this space. So we give a lot of thanks to them, and they in turn, are highly supportive of what we're doing, and really looking forward to being able to use this, once it's FDA approved. We're almost there on FDA approval, and we're almost there on finishing slide deck. I guess one slide that I threw in here is that it's important to understand that in the US anyway, there are requirements that the prescribers have to follow in terms of reporting to the DEA. The DEA in the US is the Drug Enforcement Agency. DEA monitors these kind of drugs very carefully, and then monitors the prescribers of these drugs very carefully. So it can be very burdensome to a doctor, and it discourages many doctors from even getting involved in treating these kind of patients. But having technology in the mix makes it easier for the prescriber to give the DEA the data they want. They want data, and they want data that's reliable data. And so this would be the only system that would really meet all the DEA requirements. Now, this slide I maybe should skip. This is definitely in the weeds for an audience like this. This slide really goes to questions that often business people have about why is this, what is the landscape? What are the other options? And this slide's hard to read, but let me try to summarize it. Buprenorphine, oral buprenorphine of different forms exists. There are tablets, there are films. The price varies from $180 to $600 a month, depending on its form factor and the manufacturer. But we've in the talk addressed why it's problematic. You don't get any data about what the patient's doing. The patients are known to be doing the wrong thing. There's lots of clinical studies that say these patients rarely follow the doctor's orders exactly right, and yet the doctor has to make decisions every month about what to do next with this patient. And that can be very problematic for many prescribers. Again, many prescribers don't want to participate in this sort of process. They just don't want to treat these patients at all because of that. One good thing about it is the drug does work if it's taken properly. It's really a question of trying to monitor, motivate these patients to take it properly. The other options really don't work quite as well. There's methadone, which is, people have to go to a physical clinic. It's difficult for patients to literally move from one city to another if they're really addicted to another thing, and they have to go every day to a methadone clinic. Buprenorphine is not as addictive. Buprenorphine is more of like a middle ground. It's a good bridge to get the patient off of their addiction and back to normal. There are products that are injected, and they were developed because patients do the wrong thing with tablets and pills, and the thought was, well, if they could just be injected, that'll solve that problem. They can't misuse the medication. Turns out that doesn't completely solve all the problems either, because first of all, you can't even start them on injections unless they've proven themselves to be basically model patients. They have to be stable for a certain period of time. Otherwise, it's dangerous to inject them. They could suffer from what's called precipitated withdrawal. So these injections really aren't accessible to the patient population that needs them the most. The patients that are not yet stable, that are uncontrolled, really are unable to take advantage of the injections. And there are a couple other phenomena. It's hard to get the dosing exactly right with an injection. It's hard to satisfy the patient's day-to-day change in cravings. These injections are supposed to last a month, but on Monday morning, the patient might be more stressed than they are on Friday night, and that might change their need for something to satisfy their cravings. So these injections are not the magic bullet, and both the next two columns are really about the injections. And inpatient treatment, it doesn't work very well either. Unfortunately, patients tend to, they get clean, but then they come out of this inpatient rehab facility and they go back to the real world, and they have a hard time, remaining clean. Unfortunately, the recidivism rate with inpatient rehab is very high. So actually giving them something that they can take in the real world, where they can take a little bit more, a little bit less as they need to, but everything's tracked and monitored, that truly is probably the best clinical pattern. If we can do that affordably, which is our goal, then we should be able to improve treatment care. I'm going to skip this. There are a few other companies. We do have patents around a lot of this. I think that's the point of this slide. It's more of a slide for business people. We were early on in figuring out sort of really how to leverage technology in conjunction with medication. We have some patents from a number of years ago. We've been able to get top-notch partners to help us do this in a manner that meets the FDA's high standards. There are various companies that have tried to create better pill bottles, but we're doing something more than that. We're trying to create a whole system here, and you really have to meet a lot of FDA requirements to do that in the right way. We are literally about to finally file for our FDA approval. We are weeks away after years of effort, and we would expect approval in Q1 of next year. And if we get approval for that, you can imagine we're going to then try to think about other uses for this sort of systematic approach to medication therapy management. And the treatment of pain is a next case. You might even wonder why we didn't start with that. A lot of people ask that. Well, so many people have become addicted to opioids. Why didn't you just use this product with opioids? And the issue is really that the people that are already addicted are the more expensive and difficult patients. So we wanted to start with helping to treat the most expensive and difficult patients. Again, those patients cost $60,000 a year if they're uncontrolled. And so we wanted to start with that. There are plenty of patients that end up, in trouble as a result of their pain management regimen. And certainly a technology like this would be nothing but beneficial. But we definitely needed to kind of have a first version nailed down and approved by the FDA before we iterated that and made it more widely available for everyone that's got risk factors that's going through a pain management therapy. They're all through other therapeutic areas, which I mentioned at the beginning of the discussion. I think people that have mental health issues. Again, those are the next next targets. But we had to start somewhere. Just like Amazon started with books, but now they sell everything. We had to pick one area. And unlike Amazon, this won't be applicable to everything, but it is applicable if we can drive the cost down to a lot of treatment domains where the doctor really needs to know what the patient's doing in order to help iterate the treatment and turn the treatment into something that's truly efficacious. And so the more precisely we can gather information on when they dose themselves, whether that dosing event correlates with their lab results and yada yada, the more accurately the doctor can iterate treatment and achieve success. So I think that's pretty much it. I guess this final slide just mentions that we certainly would expect to add face recognition and integration with other technologies over time. But I think that's pretty much it. A little bit about our team, and I think we can pause, and I don't know if there are any questions, but thank you for listening.
Thank you very, very much for a very interesting presentation on how to effectively treat addictive personalities and comorbid conditions. It's interesting that I read yesterday the article at the New England Journal of Medicine, which exactly talks about this. And that in this case, they were reviewing a case of a patient. They took the patient 3 years to be able to come and be treated. And basically, they blamed the medical system for it instead of providing an approach that will encourage patients to come and listen. So I just wanted to mention that to you in case you would want to check in on that particular article. So it's very, very, it looks like an extremely effective system to monitor and help the patients without them feeling that they are compromised or that they cannot do it, or the case history that was presented at the New England Journal of Medicine was really very good. So thank you. And now we will move on to Susie Halleck, our moderator, who will ask the questions that we have received from our audience. Susie?
Thank you, Dr. Derbach, and thanks, Matt, for a very interesting and relevant presentation. The first question from the audience is, what skills do you think are most important for entrepreneurs looking to grow healthcare technology startups?
That's a good question. I would say obviously it depends on the specific goals, focus of the startup. Skills you need to launch a biotech company are very different from the skills you need to launch a health IT company, for example. Probably the one overarching skill one really does need is a thorough understanding of the healthcare landscape and financial mechanisms. If you're going to try to operate in the U.S., certainly it's a very multi-layered, complex system, and it's not quite as illogical as people like to say. It's very complicated. So you really need to understand the nuances before going forward. One of the things people ask us, for example, is, well, I've seen other devices, and there are other devices that have been created. You know, we certainly don't have the only device. And like, why are you special or different? And the short answer is they don't understand the business scenario. You can't, in the United States, you really can't effectively sell a device. You have to, in the United States, think about the reimbursement processes in this particular scenario that I'm in. And you have to recognize that what the insurance companies are really paying for is kind of paying for outcomes. And they really care about mapping those outcomes to what the doctor prescribes. So your ideal scenario is you come up with something that's prescribable. The doctor just uses a pen, you know, or types on a computer, and something happens, and the payer and the doctor see an outcome. That requires putting a system together that packages, you know, technology with drug, with pharmacy process, et cetera. So we had to realize that, for example. So you have to think about what is really the viable economic path for your startup.
Thank you. And what advice do you have for current students who are interested in working in technology, healthcare, maybe being entrepreneurs themselves?
Well, I mean, my advice is, first of all, I'm encouraging of that direction. I do think that there are a lot of entrepreneurial needs, a lot of needs in the healthcare space that could be addressed via entrepreneurial efforts. Again, one has to really understand why the world is the way it is. But I think there's a lot of upside to entrepreneurial efforts. So it's hard to say exactly what to do to, you know, achieve success, because that depends on the situation. But I certainly would encourage people to, you know, apply themselves, learn more, apply themselves. There are definitely opportunities.
Thank you. And we received a question in the chat that says, is there the opportunity with less risk, yet chronic condition treated by oral agent? How do you identify and train your telehealth MDs and NPs? And how many in staffing model for a given city?
I missed I caught the back half of the question. I didn't catch the first half. Can you repeat the first part again? I don't quite follow the first part.
Thank you for sharing this integrative solution for high-risk societal need. Is there an opportunity with less risk, yet chronic condition treated by oral agents? How do you identify and train your telehealth MDs? And how many is in the staffing model for a given city?
Okay, I do understand the question now. Yeah, and it's kind of two, in a way, different questions there. So I'm gonna answer the second question first. So in our particular case, just FYI, I am involved with using a telehealth modality to treat other conditions as well. So in MedicaSafe, obviously, we're focused on opioid addiction, but I am involved with developing a telehealth network for other conditions. So I'm familiar with that. And there is a process of that you have to go through of creating a medical protocol that you use to train your MDs and NPs. And that medical protocol is going to vary depending on the exact details of the treatment scenario. So hopefully that answers the second question. To the first question of, is there an opportunity to treat less risky chronic conditions? And I assume that question is like in the, with technology like this, with our current technology, with an iteration of it. I think the answer is yes. And if the questioner is familiar with RTP or remote therapeutic monitoring, reimbursement pathways, or chronic care management reimbursement pathways, there are these mechanisms that the government has put in place, whereby if you're using technology of any sort to further monitor patients that are going through chronic care management, for example, you can get paid to do so. You can get paid to do so. There's a lot of incentives to come up with the right mix of technology to better monitor and manage patients remotely. So I don't know in those other scenarios how much our current technology will be relevant. It's certainly not irrelevant, but it's not necessarily as important in other scenarios. So you can ask yourself, in the treatment of diabetes, for example, is this type of technology that I've highlighted today, is that the most important technology? The answer is probably no, but it could be part of a mix of technologies that include more careful monitoring of the other relevant aspects of diabetic monitoring and management. So we're certainly aware of all that, and we see our software as potentially kind of a hub for hooking in other devices, other data sets, and the rest of the story is kind of similar, right? Like you're using data to help a doctor and or a payer and or a family better monitor and manage the patient through treatment.
Thank you. What challenges do you face most often in your work, and how do you overcome them?
I mean, I would say the single biggest challenge that we face is dealing with the FDA requirements, understanding the FDA requirements, dialoguing with the FDA to clarify the requirements, addressing the FDA requirements. We've chosen a path intentionally that paired the drug together with the technology in a way that ultimately makes it really easy for the prescriber and the insurance company, but it puts more burden on us to package it all together in a way that the FDA finds acceptable. So the hardest burden we faced is doing that. They're just all when you get into the FDA regs, it's amazing how one paragraph of regulatory requirements can lead to literally millions of dollars of expenses. I mean, the US is very difficult in this manner. The upside is if you go through all of that, the FDA has kind of forced a very careful assessment of all risks and all benefits, and force you to prove that you're doing what you say you're doing. And then ultimately that leads to payers being more comfortable providing reimbursement and doctors more comfortable prescribing, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. They have a very, very high bar, even for something that a lot of people would say is kind of intuitive, like what we're doing. And so getting over that bar is really tough and expensive and takes years. But once you get over that bar, hopefully you're really delivering on what you said you were going to deliver on.
Could you speak to the damage opioids have to human health and society, and how that kind of drove you to address the issue with your startup work?
Yeah, it's a fair question. I have to say, what really drove me was it was a very logical use for technology. Frankly, I mean, that's kind of why I ended up in this space, as opposed to other people have gotten involved because they've had family members that have been impacted and whatnot. And I actually, coincidentally, after we started this, there was someone who was like an adopted member of our family that did have a problem. But that wasn't the reason. The real reason to do this was, just kind of looking at it globally. It's a shame that there's no the system isn't better, right? And so I got involved because there could be a better system. Now, what is the impact of the fact that currently the system isn't very good and it's very disjointed and it doesn't leverage technology to pull everything together in a coherent way? I mean, $92 billion worth of costs and tens of thousands of lives lost every year in the US alone. And, again, doctors pulling their hair out, families that are suffering because they just don't know what to do about these patients. It's hard to even, it's such an elephant, it's hard to describe the elephant, right? You can describe little aspects of the elephant, but it's got so many aspects to it. And we don't claim to have the magic bullet. We just know that a huge fraction of these patients pass through emergency departments. Huge fraction. A huge fraction of these patients get arrested at some point and pass through a jail. And they're often released quickly on probation or parole. And nothing is being done when these patients go to an emergency department or a criminal justice system. Almost nothing. They're being what's called referred to treatment. You should go get treatment. But no one is actually stepping in and getting them into treatment, for paving the way. So I mean, I find just shocking. And if we can be the on-ramp to treatment for those patients, I think it will be a big deal and it'll be very satisfying.
What key factors should investors consider when funding startups focused on health and AI technology?
Well, I mean, as an investor myself, I can say, it's all about getting, kind of all the ducks in a row to feel confident that you're gonna have a payday at the end. If I'm just going to use a metaphor here. If you need A, B, C, and D to be lined up, and A looks amazing and C looks amazing, but B and D you haven't asked about or you haven't really thought about, and it turns out they're not going to work, then you're not going to get to the finish line. You need A, B, C, and D. You need, everything has to be an and. You can't. It's not like, in particular in healthcare, everything has to be lined up. If any one thing is not lined up, it's hard to succeed. That's not quite as much the case in other business scenarios where you can have a product that's amazing for X and not so good for Y or Z, but it can still succeed in the marketplace. There's some possibility for that in healthcare, but you have to know that there are certain things that just must be checked off. Otherwise you're not gonna fail. And by the way, that explains why some products you might think are mediocre make billions of dollars, because maybe they don't have something that's like amazing in every way, but they managed to check every little box just enough, and then boom, they get through the system and generate billions of dollars. I would look at what are all of the boxes that have to be checked, and are all of those boxes at least checked just a little bit, just enough. I don't know if that helps, but that would be my answer relative to investing in other spaces. Right, that's the difference, in my opinion, in healthcare versus investing in other spaces.
Thank you. What role do you see international policies playing in the adoption and regulation of AI tech in healthcare?
I'm sorry, can you repeat the question? What role?
What role do you see international policies playing in the adoption and regulation of AI tech in healthcare?
I'm honestly not as expert on that as I would like to be in order to answer the question well. I do know that, there are a lot of dialogues happening right now at a kind of 50,000 foot level about how to better manage AI, broadly speaking, and in healthcare. But I don't know the exact mechanisms at play and what will precisely matter at the end of the day on a global level. I could speak more about how the FDA is approaching it, but I don't really understand how global politics are gonna bear on that question.
Thank you. What excites you the most about where we're heading in this new space? And are there any risks that you're kind of nervous about as well?
Yeah, I mean, I think I mentioned I'm involved in other healthcare, in investing in other healthcare spaces as well. And so let me speak to kind of where I'm excited just in general, not just around what we're doing at MedicaSafe, but where I think this healthcare can go. I really feel that, it's pretty obvious to me that AI will ultimately make the diagnosis process, far quicker, easier, and frankly, more reliable. And surely there'll be a hybrid approach, both for regulatory reasons as well as practical reasons, meaning like there will still be a doctor in the loop, right? But ultimately, where we're going is a place where medical care will be easier to provide, and it'll be less costly. This may or may not be good for current medical practitioners who could see some of their leverage undermined. But as with any change, there'll be haves and have-nots, right? Some medical practitioners will be more empowered than ever. Some will be less empowered. I think that the beneficiaries are going to be patients, and to some degree, governments and payers, because I just think inevitably we're creating a healthcare process that's going to be more efficient and reliable.
Thank you. And you touched on this throughout your presentation, but could you just speak to what you're seeing as kind of like the future of your businesses and maybe your longer term goals?
Yeah, I mean, I do see, I guess my answer to that today would be I see a coming intersection between telehealth, AI, technologies like the technologies MedicaSafe has been talking about today, and other technologies, other device and software technologies. I see an intersection between those things. Again, telehealth modalities, AI, device technology, and increasingly affordable medications. There's a lot of news about certain new drugs that come out that are extremely expensive. That certainly happens. There's less news about the fact that there's an enormous amount of medications that are off patent, highly effective, and very, very cheap, very affordable. And if you can simply diagnose properly, treat properly, leverage those off-patent medications in the right way, you could tremendously improve global health.
What skills do you think will be most relevant in a new future AI world? Like people who are working today, what are some skills that they should be focusing on?
Yeah, that's a fair question. It's another one I don't know that I don't have a ready answer for. I don't know that I really have a great answer for. I think we're all trying to figure that out.
Great. Wanted to hear your perspective. And so what daily routines do you have that kind of help you stay on track, managing different projects and businesses?
Yeah, that's a good question. Well, I have a, I'll show you one. I have a checklist, every day. I handwrite it. Actually, sometimes I don't do it every day. I need to do it every day. Be done with my hands and try to check off as many things as possible. I think it's important to take time to read and learn. We all have a tendency to focus on our checklists, but we also need to take time to broaden our minds. And so I'm trying to balance those two on a daily basis.
Thanks. And you have in your bio that one of your businesses was acquired. How did you kind of prepare your business to be attractive to a potential buyer?
Yeah, that's a good question. So that was quite a journey, actually. That business was extremely attractive to acquirers in 2021 when the markets were very high, and a lot of businesses were being valued very highly, and I did not sell then, which was unwise of me. So when I decided I wanted to focus more on the healthcare medtech space, and I wanted to sell that business in 2023, the markets were, the opposite, very, very bad. And it was we had to work to kind of get that business to make sure it was appealing to acquirers. And fortunately, that business had an AI component. And fortunately, acquirers were very interested in AI related businesses. And so we played up the AI capabilities of that company, improved the AI capabilities of that company, created some, kind of cutting edge pilot products that leverage, within weeks, we were leveraging the latest, greatest ChatGPT technologies, incorporating that into a broader framework for kind of dialogue creation, and accelerating the response times. These AI engines tend to be very slow, so we found ways to accelerate, response times. There was definitely, I guess to sum it up, we had to figure out how to make sure that we look like a foundation for the future in an AI world. And that's what sold. And we ended up with multiple cash bidders as a result of that.
Very interesting. Thanks for sharing. And in our last minute together, any key takeaways for our audience? Maybe advice you would have given yourself at the beginning of your career or anything else?
Yeah. Well, I would say, timing is important. I had mentioned this example of, if I knew I wanted to sell that business, I should have done it in 2021, not 2023, right? You have to pick your moments. But, you can't always time things perfectly. So I would say my broader advice is to try to have a long range plan and be methodical about it. And then the right moments will come along, right? You've got to be aware when the right moments come along, but you've got to kind of plan very methodically for the long run and trust that your opportunities will arise when the time comes.
Thank you. I'll turn back to Dr. Durbeck to close out.
Thank you very much, Susie, for monitoring. Matt, there's a couple of questions that came to me. One of them is, how do you process your monitoring and sharing useful information? How many people do they need, and how are they involved with making sure that the patients are in the program and do what they are supposed to do?
If I follow the question, we don't need very many people involved at all. I mean, it's all automated. The prescriber, the doctor, needs to have all that information presented to them. And they want that information at the time when they're reviewing the patient for their subsequent follow-on prescription. In the United States, they really don't want that information ahead of time because they're not getting paid to look at it ahead of time. They want it when they're getting paid to look at it. And they want it all packaged up very nicely. And they want as many inferences presented to them as is necessary for them to make a quick and accurate treatment decision.
Thank you. Thinking about how the FDA approached and the pharma's approach COVID, do you think that it's going to take as long to be able to assist the patients that are addicted or other concomitant factors to bring it up to a level that is much more beneficial to the patient?
I think it's going to take much longer. I think this is a multi-decade need. This is not like COVID where there's going to be a magic bullet. People have been hoping for a magic bullet, and it's very unlikely that there's going to be a magic bullet, which is why we took the approach of, well, what are systemic needs that could help prescribers not just today, but over the next decade. And I think that's what's going to be required.
Thank you very, very much. It was a very interesting and informative presentation. Since some of our viewers are physicians, actually a lot of our board is made up of a lot of physicians who often watch these seminars, that they would take everything that you mentioned to heart and see whether they can do anything to implement procedures that are effective and beneficial to patients and to the doctors. So have a very, very good week. Take good care of yourself, and goodbye.
Thank you.